Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It is 10 o'clock on the dot here on April 2nd, 2022. Wherever you are listening, however you are listening today, you're welcome here. And I look forward to having another wonderful family education and support group here with anyone who is interested. And let me give a little introduction of myself while people are starting to trickle in. And good morning to everyone coming in. I see some of the good morning comments. Really happy to be here again with you all. And we'll go from there. So a quick introduction of myself and what this is and why we do this. This is the weekly family education and support group that is live. So as you're watching this right now, this is happening in real time. The primary purpose and the primary function of this group is to be able to provide education, knowledge, experience on subjects such as mental health, addictions, the recovery process, communication, rebuilding trust, rebuilding families, restoring faith, the self-care process, and a little bit of everything in between. So if you are here for yourself, you're welcome. If you're here watching this for your loved one, you're welcome. And if you're here just to get educated because you may be in the field of addictions and mental health, you're also welcome. And also, these are shareable links. You can send these to anybody and everybody who you feel will benefit from it. And it is an interactive session. So as on the side, when Hossein, my mom, Debbie have shared some, good morning comments. If anybody has any questions on the subject matters, you're always welcome to ask those questions in the side, and I will respond to them in real time. And let me put that banner up there that says you can ask your questions. There we go, high tech. So a little bit about myself. My name is Param. I'm the weekly host of this show. Sometimes I come speak myself. Sometimes I'll bring guests. Sometimes, I'll bring, slides, different types of ways to kind of keep the engagement going. But I do have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy with an emphasis in child development. The reason why that emphasis is important is because human development happens over the course of the lifespan. And that oftentimes starts from the beginning. What's up, Sandra? Good to have you here. I've heard a lot, so I know you're a fan. I appreciate you coming here. Jim, what's up? Good morning. And today's actually one of those ones that I'm going to use my background and my experience of childhood development and the life experiences we have and how it impacts us later on in life. And so I also am a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. So kind of my primary specialty, I guess, is with addictions and human relationships in general. I also do coach high school basketball because it's something that I'm passionate about. I've been doing it for 14 seasons now, and it's my way of kind of adding some balance to the world of, the therapeutic world of addictions. And I'm also, in recovery myself. So in about 2 months, I'll be celebrating 14 years clean and sober. But as people like Jim say, we don't kind of, you got to wait till we get there. So I'm going to wait till I get to that 14 years to say I got 14 years. So I got 13 years and 10 months. And Lynn, what's up? Cataline, what's up? Cheryl, what's up, everyone? Thank you for being here, everyone. It's a good crowd. So you're not here to learn about my introduction. Well, maybe some of you are, but for the most part, you're here because you want to get some information, some knowledge, some education on, hey, what's up? Yeah, Pej, no fronts. There you go, Jim. All the recovery guys are telling me no fronts. I didn't want no fronts, man. I was just saying the time's coming up. So, but long story short, today I'm going to talk about 9 different ways that childhood trauma or the experiences we have in childhood, they manifest in our adult relationships. And I'm not just talking about our relationships when it comes to other human beings, which is what we're going to talk about, but also our relationships when it comes to the recovery process. Because recovery is also a relationship. The process of recovery is a relationship. It's a relationship in which one starts to learn about self, which is probably where it really starts. And the second one is the relationship where we start to be able to integrate with others. So I'm going to go over 9 different ways how childhood trauma can impact an individual's relationships and ultimately their recovery. And before I get into that real quick, I want to distinguish between 2 things right here. There's a difference between a traumatic event and trauma. A traumatic event is something external that happens to an individual. It's something that happens to them. It's something they see. It's something they experience. It's like an event. You can identify it. As a result of a traumatic event, the individual experiences trauma on a psychological, emotional, physical, spiritual level within. Okay. Trauma is like the body's adaptation to traumatic events. We'll put it there. So that's kind of just the premise of that I want everyone to know. And also, I've shared this before, so I will share this again, that trauma is not always things that happen to the individual that shouldn't have happened. We know what those things are: abuse, psychological, emotional, physical, sexual, spiritual abuse on a human being, abandonment on a human being, watching people have domestic violence in a house on a human being, watching family members go through addictions and mental health while you're growing up, watching people pass away and die short as a result. All that's traumatic, right? So it's not always things that happen that shouldn't have happened. Sometimes trauma is things that should have happened that never happened. There are things in a life, in the human development, that need to happen for the human to start to feel safe, secure in their world, in their space, comfortable, able to articulate, freely express themselves. There's things that's supposed to happen, and sometimes they don't. And it's not always a fault thing. It's not the fault. So, like, for example, let's say there's two highly successful parents. Society pats them on the back because they're out there, they're doing positive things, they're making healthy contributions. But we know oftentimes, especially in the Western world, the more success comes with more responsibility, more burdens, more stress, more of that kind of stuff. We all know this, more obligations, more engagements. So when two successful human beings are always out and about, pursuing their success and making a positive contribution on society, oftentimes the child at home is neglected. And they're not abusing the kid. They're probably providing whatever the heck the kid needs. They're probably meeting all of their needs and also getting the wants too. Yet that child sometimes is feeling almost, in a sense, abandoned. Because in a child's mind, when a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, when the parents are never home because they're out doing wonderful things, they can't understand all that. They just feel the mom's never home, the dad's never home. There's actually studies done on the children of highly influential and highly successful people. Their experience as a child is very similar to the experience of those who have their parents literally abandon and neglect them. And you might say, how dare you say that? One person didn't even care about his family and left, and the other one cared so much about their family. All they wanted to do was succeed and work and provide for them and this and that. That is true from the adult perspective. But from a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old's perspective, he or she or they don't know the difference. They don't know the difference when dad's traveling, 50 of the 52 days of the week to provide for the family. The child just feels that dad's not home for 50 of the 52 days of the week, of the year. So I just want to preface that. So are you ready for the 9 ways that childhood trauma or just trauma can impact and how it manifests in relationships in adulthood and also in recovery? So the number 1 way is fear of abandonment. Fear of abandonment is so significant. And as a clinician who's worked with human beings in the addiction space, there is an underlying fear of abandonment, because here's why. When your primary caregivers, let's just say, left, whether they chose to leave, whether they passed away, whether they were pulled in different directions, it creates this false sense of like the lack of security, the opposite of security in an individual, like that nothing is ever stable. So guess what happens? When they get into relationships, they always have a fear that the person is going to leave them. They always have a fear that this isn't going to work out. They always have a fear that no matter what I do is not going to be enough. And where did that first thing get planted? When they were a child. And guess what? Sometimes this also manifests in the flip side of it. Excessive amounts of control, excessive amounts of jealousy, excessive amounts of doing what they can to hold something together, right? So it's not always a fear of like, oh my God, the person's going to leave me. It's the fear of the person's going to leave me and I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep them. And also, by the way, the fear of abandonment sometimes happens in recovery processes. I've worked with people as a clinician, and even though in the clinician, there's this thing that we do not abandon clients, it's actually unethical and on some level could have some legality to it. You don't abandon human beings. There's a way that relationships end. So what happens is, even clients going through it, they feel like the therapist is going to abandon them because everyone else in their life did. And so, yeah, thank you. Pejman said, great topic. Sarah here said, great, deep appreciation for this topic and the education you're providing. Thanks, Parham. I appreciate it, Sarah. This is real stuff. You know, I did this with our program participants this morning. It was a heavy talk for 8:30 in the morning on a Saturday, but I did it. So the next one is getting irritable or easily annoyed with others. And I'll tell you why. People that come from trauma, oftentimes they were in environments that they were highly criticized, that they felt like no matter what they did, it was going to change the way it ended up, but we all know it doesn't. There's nothing a child can do that's going to impact the way the parents are treating each other. You know, it's not even about the child, but the kid thinks it is. So when they get into situations, they're highly, easily irritated. They easily get annoyed by the smallest things that other people do. The smallest things. As someone else that didn't experience any type of adversity and childhood trauma and all that kind of stuff, which is rare, by the way, I'll tell you that. It might not be anything. But for the person that like lived that their environment, they breathed it. Every day they woke up, there was something that no matter what they did, either people were being hard on them or vice versa. Remember, I've taught this, by the way, so I'm really happy I have a lot of people coming back, because there is a part of this component of coming up in a traumatic environment that if other people are telling you things and putting you down and all that kind of stuff, guess what happens later on in life? That becomes the inner critic of that individual. So what happens is that human being starts to do to self what others did to them. They start to feel and believe they're not good enough. They start to feel and believe that they can't. They start to feel like they are hopeless. They have this learned helplessness that they cannot do it. And I'm telling you, someone that's on edge like that, someone that's on that, like on that area of life that just, it's really easy for them to get annoyed with other people, you know, and get deeply frustrated. So the next one is, this one happens a lot. You know, we have a lot of counselors watching this right now. We have some people that have been through. We have some family members that have experienced it either themselves or with their loved ones. There is this significant need for a lot of space and time to yourself. So if you experience childhood trauma in adulthood, how that manifests is you need a lot of space and time for yourself. And let me educate you on why. Coming up in a dysfunctional environment, there is a lot of stress. Okay, so imagine being a child and you're coming up and you're growing up and you're developing in a stressful and dysfunctional environment. You experience a lot of stress. That stress starts to impact the autoimmune system. It starts to impact the way that we see the world, process the world, experience the world. And what that ultimately does is it starts to put the individual in a state of hypervigilance, because if you don't know what the environment is going to do, you're always on edge, right? And you know this. I mean, if you come from dysfunction, if you had dysfunction in your world, in your life growing up, whether it was internal in the house or external in wars, or whether it was with mom and dad going at each other or siblings or, you know, family members, you know that there's a discomfort. It's called hypervigilance, with being on edge. And the environment's not changing, so the person feels like that at all times. So I always say this, you know, there's this thing called PTSD. We had Sarah here a few weeks ago talking about PTSD and trauma. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. And traditionally, I mean, long time ago, it was called shell shock, right? It was something that it was attributed to soldiers coming back from war. And they were very hyper-vigilant because they were in environments that they, you know, couldn't predict, and they were very volatile, and there was a lot of loudness and a lot of chaos and a lot of explosions and a lot of just unpredictable things happening. So later on, when they're at home and they're no longer at war, they might be sleeping and they might hear a sound, or someone might walk up behind them, or they might just have a sense of feeling that completely throws them back into that previous state. It dysregulates them and puts them back into that combat-like state. And that's, you know, post-traumatic stress. That's what the essence of it is. Now, I'll tell you this. There's a lot of people that may have never been to a war, that have never actually fought a war, that have never been firefighters or cops or active duty soldiers or whatever you call that. However, growing up, their life experience was very similar to a war. And I know some people right now might think that's a controversial statement to say, how are you comparing combat with the enemy to growing up in a dysfunctional home? Again, I'm not saying this is the perspective of an adult. Go into the mind of a 3 and a 4 and a 5-year-old and having mom and dad and one person being good and one person being bad and one being the enemy and one being the hero and fighting and yelling and screaming and saying bad things about each other and doors closing and glasses breaking and people using substances and people waking up in the middle of the night and all that kind of stuff, and you're trying to sleep in that environment. Can you see how that same experience can produce the same symptoms that individuals can get through war? So those type of people later on in life, they usually have PTSD. Yes, my friends, you can have PTSD from childhood trauma. I know for some of you, that's like, well, of course you can. Some people have no idea. Some people don't know what it's like to have hypervigilance throughout life as a result of your upbringing. There's some, to show you the power of PTSD, someone that's experienced a lot of trauma growing up, someone can give them a look. Just give them like a certain look, or kind of like, something like that, or something intimidating, or just kind of like lift their hand up just a little bit. And the person goes in a completely dysregulated state and goes in a state of shock and panic. So how does that impact someone growing up in life? They have a significant need for time to themselves, because guess what? The only time that they were able to find peace was when they were by themselves. And there's a lot of clients that tell me this all the time, and I'm not making this up. When I lay in bed, like at 11 o'clock at night, I sometimes have a hard time falling asleep, or that's the only time I really get to enjoy some peace. And they'll stay up from like 11 to 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. And they think like, oh, it's just I can't fall asleep at night. That's not the case. That's not what's happening. I always ask them, growing up, tell me about your home life. And they say, well, oftentimes there's a lot of yelling and fighting going on. So when everybody else went to sleep, that was their time to be able to find peace. So the reason why they're up at 11 to 2 isn't because they're just night owls and they like being up. They're up from 11 to 2 because over the years and years and years of conditioning and programming, that's the only time that they were able to find peace. 11 to 2 in the morning, because everyone else was sleeping. And they're like, so now what happens as an adult, you can stay up to 11 to 2, nothing wrong with that. But if you have adult things to do and you got to be up at 7 in the morning, 6 in the morning, what type of physical exhaustion are you going to have? How much caffeine do you got to drink to be able to function in society? How much irritability are you going to get from lack of sleep? And ultimately, how weak is your immune system going to get, and how sick are you going to get? So that was just a little nugget there regarding the need of space to self. And by the way, one of the most dangerous things in recovery is what? Isolation. So if someone experienced a lot of childhood trauma and it's manifesting in their adult relationships, and everyone in recovery is saying, hey, you got to go meet people, socialize with people, make friends, make connections. And they're like, well, that's too much. I'd rather just be by myself. Isolation is one of the most, if any of the counselors here can comment on that, is why isolation is so risky and dangerous for people in early recovery and in developing that. I'd really appreciate some of your insight there. Jim's special aid. Jim, you know what? I'm going to give you a little shit there because I know you do. Jim does this every week, so I'm not going to give him shit for leaving. But he is a significant Saturday movie guy. He's been doing this. I've known Jim for 6 years now. And when movie season's out, man, Jim's there Saturdays to watch it. Go enjoy it, man. It's well-deserved. You kicked ass this week. I appreciate you, and I'll see you Monday. So the next one that I have here, number 4, there's 9 of these. The next one is unequal financial and household responsibilities. So the parents watching this are like, oh, I want to listen to this one because I feel like I've carried the weight for my kid for so many years. And I feel like we're the ones always contributing and they're not, and all that kind of stuff. Well, where do you think that comes from? And again, I'm not picking on anybody watching this right now. That's none of my business. I've never worked with anybody here clinically. I don't know you therapeutically, but I do know about the nature of recovery and how it works. Is people that experience a lot of trauma, it goes one or two ways, okay, when it comes to this specific component of financial and household responsibilities. So version 1 are those who say, the world has screwed me over. Everyone is out there to fend for themselves. I can't trust anybody. So therefore, I will go and work my butt off. I will make my own money. I will do my own chores. I will be fully responsible myself. And that's the way I'm going to live life because I can't depend on others. That happens to a lot of people. Or there's this other version that they become so dependent on others taking care of them. They become so dependent on not working because someone else is providing for them that they almost become crippled and paralyzed because others are doing for them what they probably need to be doing, and they become dependent as a result of it. And by the way, what that looks like is unmet needs during childhood. So when someone is an adult and other people are taking care of them financially, spiritually, all that kind of stuff, for me as a clinician, is that individual has some unmet needs that they needed to get met during childhood that never got met. So it's just a delay of human progression. So instead of doing some things from like ages 3 to 10 that never happened, it's happening from like ages 17 to 30. It always has to happen. So for family members, when we talk about the whole thing about enabling, we talk about it almost every week. When you enable someone, you are making them become reliant and dependent on your caretaking. Do you understand what that means? When you try to help somebody with pure intentions that you are trying to help your loved one, please consider that you might be also crippling them. I know that doesn't make sense for some of you because what do you mean if I help my kid, I'm crippling them? I'm actually helping them do it. You don't need to, because they're no longer kids. Grown adults need to do things, accomplish things. Now, can you help them? Sure, we can help people, but we don't enable people. And there's a big difference there. Enabling disables them. Helping empowers them, right? Enabling disables a person. Helping empowers them. How do we know when to help somebody? I shared this last week. I'll share it again because we have a few extra people here that weren't here. Enabling somebody is doing something for someone that they could and should be doing for themselves. Okay? Helping someone is doing something for someone that they can't and really don't have the resources to do for themselves. Okay? So you got to distinguish that. Like, hey, if I do this for my kid, can my kid really do this? Like, if I want to give my kid $40, can my kid go make $40 on his own? Probably. Right? Enabling is helping is if my kid has this needs to go see a doctor and the doctor bill or the psychiatric bill is $250. Can my kid pay this? He probably can't. Can I pay this? I probably can. Okay, I'm going to help my kid here. But also this, if you can't do it, by the way, you don't got to put yourself in a bad situation. I want to see Cheryl. I'm going to put up your comment here. She said, this talk was custom made for me. 15 years clean and sober. Love my life, but still things to work on that are challenging and tough sometimes. First of all, Cheryl, congratulations on your sobriety. I really want you to know that. And I also want to say thank you for allowing others to see that after abstinence and becoming clean and sober and removing the substances from our system, oftentimes the deeper work still exists and it's an opportunity for growth. So just the fact that you came and you expressed this, I know that you're actively working on yourself, or else you wouldn't be able to say anything like this. And I'm happy you love your life. And it's beautiful to know that despite things being tough sometimes, that you're still working on things. And I'm glad this talk was made for you. Thank you for listening. Feel free to share this with whoever you want. I do know that you make a significant contribution to recovery. So the next one, now we're getting the juicy stuff. So thank you for that, Cheryl. How does childhood trauma manifest in adult relationships? Well, ready for this? Now all the parents here are going to identify with this. Settling and staying in a relationship much longer than its expiration date. Okay? So people that experience childhood trauma, they often stay in relationships much longer than its expiration date. Now, before we get into people, because people get really, defensive when I talk about people, let's just talk about substances. How many people with childhood trauma use substances long after it stopped working? Oh my gosh. Literally everyone. Like, the beginning part, let me clear this up for people who might not know. The initial stages of substance use for the substance user is magic. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's everything they ever wanted, needed, cared for, hoped for. It is the reason why they are willing to give up anything and everything in their life for that, for the continued feeling of that. If you ever wonder, like, why does somebody keep using a drug or a substance despite of all the bad stuff, is because what they get out of it is worth it to them. It's as simple as that. It might not make sense to someone that doesn't go through that, but whatever they get out of it is worth it to them. But eventually there's an expiration date to that. So in the program, 12-step programs, it says at first it's all fun, and then it becomes fun and problems. So you're still having fun, but there's still some problems in there. And then it becomes just straight problems. When it gets to the stage of it just being problems, that's safe to say the expiration dates happen there. Yet some people continue to use days, weeks, months, years, decades after the expiration date. So how does this relate to the individuals who don't use substances? There are millions of people that stay in relationships after the expiration date's over. They stay in relationships long after the payoff is worth it. And why is that they do it? A lot of it comes from this thing called codependency. I've talked about it so many times here. And codependency is rooted in dysfunctional upbringing, rooted in low self-esteem, and rooted in getting our fix. Yes, I use the word fix like drug addicts do. Getting our fix from others. Taking on the emotions of others. Doing things for others. Caring for others at the cost of one's own self, one's own sanity, one's own health. So one of the signs is they settle and stay in relationships much longer than its expiration date. And when you wake up to that and say, I no longer want to be in this relationship, I no longer want to use, I no longer want to continue this pattern, that's when you actually start to look into the roots of your codependency. When and where did it start? Because I'll tell you this, if you do not look in the roots of it, guess what happens? You will get in another relationship that you will do the exact same thing. So number 6 is constant arguing or fighting in relationships or avoiding conflicts at all costs. So people usually repeat situations, environments, experiences that are familiar to them. Okay? So familiarity is a very powerful thing in human experience. If you're a child growing up in dysfunction, growing up in trauma, growing up in chaos, that becomes the norm. Therefore, when you get in a relationship, if things are calm, if things are mellow, if things are cool, guess what you're going to do? Find ways to fight, find ways to argue, find ways to stir up the pot, because guess what that does? It makes the world familiar. Or the flip side of it, if you're in a world that is dysfunctional, chaotic, traumatic growing up, you do the exact opposite. You detach yourself, you leave, you avoid conflict at all costs because you don't want to be a part of that because it's too overwhelming. Like the familiarity of it freaks you out. And those are the type of people that develop a range of mental disorders in the form of anxiety. So like social anxiety, or even the most extreme version of agoraphobia. You ever wonder why somebody just can't go completely out and meet people, talk to people, connect with people, all that kind of stuff? It's not just because they don't feel comfortable in it, because at some point in their life, it was uncomfortable. At some point in their life, it was overwhelming. And instead of going through that process again, they just avoid it at all costs. So there's 3 more left. And anybody, if you have any feedbacks, we're at the 30-minute mark. I have 3 more of these things to go. If you have any questions about what I'm saying, if you want to slow me down, if you want to provide some insight, feel free to. You know, I'm very open to it. And very receptive to your feedback. And if you don't agree with something, by the way, feel free to. And I will do my best to explain, deeper elaborate on any of the points that I'm making. So the next one is, this one actually happens not just in relationships with self. So people that experience childhood adversity, trauma, they don't know how to repair themselves and the relationship after a fight. Right? So here's the thing. We all know arguing, fighting, to some level, not seeing eye to eye is something that's common in relationships. It's common in life, right? It's not like a sign of a failed or weak something. It's just a part of life. The same way, the weather is not always calm and peaceful. There's disturbance and disruptions in the weather. We are a representation of nature. So therefore, we can appear like the weather at sometimes too. There's nothing wrong with that. But people that come from that environment, Because what happens is this, is if a child is growing up in dysfunction and they get dysregulated. So like mom and dad are yelling, fighting, screaming, or some abuse happened. When a child gets dysregulated, they don't know what to do with that emotion. So it's the job of the adult to come down, get to the level of the child. That's how you're supposed to speak to kids. Maybe get on your knee and look the kid in the eye and get on their level and let them know what they're experiencing. Let them know, identify the feelings they're having. Let them know what they can do and how they're going to be supported through this process. And eventually, through the process of that love and education and support, the child starts to regulate again and says, okay, I'm safe again. Now, what happens if none of that ever happens? A child gets dysregulated, gets all messed up in the head, psychologically, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and there's nobody in the environment to help them repair. Do you really think a child repairs on their own? Nope. How do I know this? I can have an adult, 40-year-old adult. Let's just go somewhere in the middle. Now, they could be 55, 60. They could be 20, 25, 30. Let's just go with the 40-year-old adult. I know a 40-year-old adult, for example, and they say, when I was young, I experienced X, Y, and Z. And in my current life right now, when this happens, I revert back and I go back to that time frame and I feel overwhelmed and scared and lost. When they talk about what it is that they experience, they can revert back into a childlike emotional state. Literally. And sometimes they even regress to the point that their speech changes. They start talking like a child when they go into that state. Now, if they were able to repair themselves, none of this would have happened. What does that tell me? That tells me that there's open wounds. It's kind of like if somebody was pissed off and angry about something that happened when they were 14 years old, and now they're 40-year-old and they're still pissed off in it. Do you really think the 40-year-old's the one talking? No, it's the 14-year-old that never got repaired. The 14-year-old's the one that's acting out in anger or crying or being impulsive. So children don't know how to repair themselves after fights, straight up. I wish I could tell you that they do, but they don't. That's why they stay wounded. And the more hurt they become, the more they start to act out in destructive ways. Because what happens is those behaviors, which one of them, by the way, could be substance abuse, they help them cope with the pain. So children always say, like, hey, why does so-and-so act out so impulsively with sex or promiscuity? Is because oftentimes when they didn't receive the love at home, they're on this like kamikaze mission, like death mission, to go do whatever they can to just feel a little bit of love. That makes sense to the 13-year-old. It doesn't make sense to us. We're like, hey, you're going to put yourself in some jeopardy. You're going to hurt yourself. Something bad's going to happen. To the kid, they're like, oh, I get to experience love. Kids go and they join gangs, or they hang out with older kids, or they start doing drugs with people that are bad, and family members like, what are you doing this for? Well, it's like, hey, man, the kid got beat all the time at home, or the dad left and the mom and dad are arguing all the time, and the kid goes out to the streets and two guys put their arms around him and give him love for the first time. That's why he's choosing them. They are helping him repair after the feelings that they had. So if we don't learn how to repair ourselves because other people need to help us when we're children, guess what happens as an adult? You get in fights with people, you argue with people, and you don't know how to repair yourself after a fight. You can yell at somebody and you don't know what to do. Someone can yell at you and you don't know what to do. And that's an impact of childhood trauma, by the way. Not being able to repair yourself after a fight. And by the way, can someone work on that stuff? Absolutely. We can heal wounds. But here's the thing. I want you to all remember this. No matter what you heal, no matter what you work on, there will always be scars. There will always be the scars of that event. So I think last week Hossein said something in here. He said, Param, is it okay to be able to forgive people but not forget them? And I said, absolutely. Absolutely, you can forgive someone but not forget the event. There's nothing wrong with that. The same way, if I experienced some trauma as a kid, I can forgive whoever was involved, but heck no, I'm not going to forget it, because the scars are always there. Scars are nice memories of, like, reminders of our life experience, by the way. They are beautiful, as long as they're closed off. An open wound, there's no beauty about it. An open wound is a liability. An open wound causes us to do things and destroy our lives out of fear and the ways we go about trying to protect it. So the next two are opposite of each other. So the first one is this thing called serial monogamy. So obviously this is monogamy in its own, based on which side of the spectrum you fall on, could be like one of the goals in life. That's like what people are striving to do, is to be with one person, to have one partner. But serial monogamy is a byproduct of childhood trauma, oftentimes, because the individual is terrified of being alone. So what does serial monogamy means? Like repetitive, continuous, without a break, over and over again. So the person's in a 2-year relationship, they get out of it. A week later, they're in another 3-year relationship, they get out of it. They're in another relationship, they get out of it. The inability to sit with oneself. This person usually feels like they are not worthy of love. So if they can get with someone that can provide that for them, it's better than being alone. It's better than being alone for them. And they go from one relationship to another. And guess what happens with serial monogamists? And not always it's a bad thing, by the way, because each person you get with could be good. But in a case of being wounded and not having worked on self, serial monogamy typically looks like the same relationship over and over again, just a different name, different person. Because we're operating from a place of not want, but a place of need. It's like it's a compulsion we're trying to use it as a coping skill, right? To not be alone. So, and this one's really important, because whenever someone's in recovery, right, there is something that is told to all individuals. So they say, hey, in your first year of your recovery, try not to get in a major relationship. But if you are in one, it's a little different. You want to hold that relationship for the first year, because you want to be able to see what happens through the process of the recovery, see who you are, see who they are, get to know each other again. But if you're not in a relationship, people like me strongly recommend and encourage, hey, don't get in a relationship for your first year. Why is that the case? Because you need to find out who you are, what's going on with your life. You need to find out what you like, what you don't like. You need to start working on yourself, working on your issues, working on your core issues, working on your root issues. Unfortunately, for people like me and people like me that make that suggestion, we don't know if it ever works, because no one ever does it, right? That's the running joke, is they say don't get in a relationship in your first year, and no one knows if that advice has ever worked, because not one person ever follows it. That's maybe more than one person, but for the most part, people don't follow it, because here's the thing: in early recovery, nobody likes themselves, right? And there's some parents sometimes tell me, hey, my kid's self-esteem is so low. My kid isn't feeling good about him or herself. I'm like, well, excuse my language, no shit. Self-esteem is a byproduct of doing esteemable acts. So if you don't know what self-esteem is, let me tell you. Self-esteem is a result of doing esteemable acts. Esteemable acts is like things that make you proud and feel good, and raise your chest and look in the mirror and say, I'm proud of the reflection I see. That's self-esteem. Or the environment telling you. So like mom and dad telling you, hey, you're good, you're wonderful, you're smart, you're beautiful the way you are, we accept you. When mom and dad are critical, telling you what you're doing is wrong and who you are is wrong and who you hang out with is wrong, it really diminishes self-esteem. And on top of that, you don't do any esteemable acts. So now you're trying to get sober, 5, 10, 15 years of not doing anything for your self-esteem. And now you're sober and your head's down like this and you're sad and you don't really have the excitement, enthusiasm, and all that kind of stuff. And Sandra, I'll answer your question in 1 second, okay? So when you're going through that whole process, how could someone have self-esteem? If prior to recovery, what you did was hang out with people that were bad, do things that were bad to get money, possibly commit crimes, not go to school, not keep a job, not talk to your family, not take care of your health. If that's who you were and now you get sober, how the heck could you have self-esteem? So the good question here from Sandra, you asked me, what is early recovery? How much time? So the working definition we have here, Sandra, in this group for recovery is to recover something means to regain something that's been lost, stolen, or destroyed. Okay, regain something that's been lost, stolen, or destroyed. And that's what it means. So usually what that is the relationship with oneself. So what everyone's looking for, whether you're the individual using the substance or like you, the family member, is reconnect with self. That's like the premise of it. But now recovery has different components to it. So there is a physical recovery, right? Like staying away from substances. And I'll tell you some different things about that. There is a emotional recovery. There is recovery with family members, like rebuilding trust of family, right? Rebuilding trust with society. There is a vocational and educational and kind of work type recovery component. There is a self-care recovery component that I always like to talk about. So early recovery is different in terms of time. I don't like giving timelines because each of those components takes a different amount of time, right? So for example, some families with trust, and I know your family is not really that case because you guys are tightly bonded at this point, but there's some family members that takes them 2 years before they start trusting their loved one again, right? That would all be considered early recovery because you're trying to regain something that's been lost, stolen, or destroyed. There's some people that, like for example, when I went to school at the age of 25, I had no education, no background, no nothing. I went to school for 7 years straight. At the age of 32, I got my master's degree. So for me, vocationally, my early recovery was at least 4 years to get my bachelor's, to be able to get a job, to be fully self-sufficient. And then, by 7 years, I felt like, okay, I made it and the vocational was done. Check. My family trust, a year. Check. My self-care, maybe just 6 months. 6 months of taking care of myself, going to the gym, eating right, sleeping well, spending my time with good, healthy people. Like after 6 months, I was feeling good about myself. Brain, a little bit different, depending on the substance. Methamphetamines takes 18 months after the use to be able to get brain neurotransmitters back firing and working and get natural dopamine going. So early recovery, I guess, to answer your question, you look at all of these different components, kind of like in a big chart, realizing that each one of them has a different timeline connected to it. Some are shorter, right? And some are longer. And the goal becomes to, so the whole thing, some people say it's the first year. Some things, Sandra, in the first year do get resolved and some things don't, straight up. So it's hard to say like, hey, just after a year, everything's going to be okay. For me, I know the first year was good. The second year is when I started to see and feel tangible changes in my life. Like I started to look at myself in the mirror and just say, you know what? I'm liking the reflection I see today. My parents were able to talk to me in a different, way that they were talking. They weren't always on edge, that kind of stuff like that. So hopefully that answered your question. And feel free to ask any questions you want. And the last one that I have, let's see. It's almost like you can never put it in the past tense. Yes, Cataline. I mean, there are some parts of it. You are right. So I want to give you some credit for that statement. So, like recovery is not something that you say, oh, I recovered and I'm done. Right. So I will give you that because I believe that in each phase of recovery, there's always a new opportunity for growth, always a new opportunity for development, always a new opportunity for discovery, always a new opportunity for transformation. And so the recovery process is beautiful because it is infinite, right? Because we as human beings can transform and continue to transform. But there are components of our recovery, I do believe, Cataline, like the substance abuse, right? We actively have to keep continuing to work to not pick up the drink. But the active days of drinking and using, those days could become past tense, right? When you get a little bit of time and buffer between it, the days of like drinking by yourself and drinking away from people and hiding drinks and all that kind of crap, I hope to God one day that becomes past tense and it's not a part of your story. Now it's what you do to not make that happen again. It's what you do to prevent that from happening again that becomes current and active in real time in the here and now. But there are certain things like ways we treat other people, ways we don't follow through with commitment. I hope some of those things become a part of our past. So I agree with the premise of what you're saying, but I do want you to open up your perception a little bit right there to see if you can get a little bit, identify the things that you're going to make be a part of your past. Like there are certain people in my past that I for sure can say they're past tense, like for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, it's past tense, and you got to find out what those are for yourself, because that does help. When you eliminate what's in the past, you can really focus on what you got to focus on in the present. Hope that made sense. And the last one I got here is some people, because of their childhood trauma, they become fearful of committing, or to make it easier, they just avoid commitments and relationships altogether. Now, this could become dangerous in the recovery world. I'll tell you why. Sometimes people are afraid of committing to recovery. They're afraid of saying, okay, if I choose this recovery world, what do I have? If I choose this recovery world, what am I going to lose out on? And so what they do is they just avoid it altogether. They avoid commitments altogether. And in relationships, we know how that could impact the relationship, but the relationship with self, do they avoid it? The relationship with substances, do they, the recovery side of things, do they avoid it? Relationships with a sponsor, do they avoid it? And I don't know. So hopefully in today's talk, we went 45 minutes. So really what I wanted to talk about was this, that childhood trauma manifests itself in adult relationships. Like that's just a fact. And when we haven't worked through our childhood trauma, it continues to show up day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and moving forward. So let me see what this comment says. It says, another powerful Saturday morning, understanding the result of trauma is so important to understand why our loved ones behave as they do or they have or do without judgment. And that last part, without judgment, Eileen, it's like that takes such a big person to be able to do that, because here's the thing. We're all judging machines. And I'm not saying me and you. It's just society is a judging machine. We either look at something or someone and automatically think that we're better than someone or less than someone. It's either false pride, ego, whatever you want. Like we're better than that or we're not as good as that. But to be able to look at something or someone and their behavior, no matter how overt it is or no matter how loud it is, and just say, that's just what they're doing today. That's how they're responding today. And that's okay. Because their behavior is their behavior and it has really nothing to do with me, none of my business and all that kind of stuff. There's some power to that. So it takes an evolution of a human to be able to look at that and what you just said right there, Eileen, with to look at someone's behavior without judgment. So let's see what we have here. Hossein, you said, thank you for another great and highly educational session. I learned a lot today. Thank you. I'll talk to you later today. Therefore, we are always growing, always evolving. It's the actions we take in our life that help us move through the trauma. Absolutely. And for sure. So thank you for summarizing that. We all can move through trauma. All of us can move through trauma. We can't just act like it never happened. Some trauma will leave scars, and that's okay. They're like reminders of our adversity and our resilience in the journey of life. But we can move through them. And Sandra, some of the most powerful people I've ever met in life are the ones that have experienced the most amount of trauma. Debbie, you said, thank you so much. This content was helpful and many key reminders. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad it was helpful in helping understand, self, others, relationships. And sometimes the behavior of some, when it doesn't make sense to us, just remember that it might be making sense to them. And that's the most powerful thing I could tell you right there is like when someone's doing something like, why the hell is he doing this? Or why is she doing this? Just know at some point in their life that action made sense to them and they're doing it for a reason, even if we don't understand that same reason. Sandra, you're welcome. Cheryl, thank you so much. We'll spend time thinking more about this. Right on. My job is done. That's the whole point, is to plant some seeds. And whether they're like you, 15 years in the recovery process or 15 hours or 15 days, the whole point is to do that. And Cataline, you're welcome. Lynn, love you. You're welcome. And that's all I got for today. So thank you so much. If there's any topics, I say this every once in a while, the same comments that you just wrote right now, just write, hey, idea for topic next week, suggestion for topic next week. Just write down what you want. And I promise I'll get to it. It might not be exactly next week, but it'll be one of the weeks upcoming. And I will do my best to cover information that you want, not just things that I want to share. So love and appreciate you. Have a wonderful weekend. I will see you soon. All right, guys, take care. Bye, everyone.